Hey guys, it's Fuse from Nada, and today I will be going over how to play Restoration Druid in patch 8.2. I'll be going over your talent builds, utility, Azerite traits, essences, stat priority, gems and enchants, macros and add-ons, and your best trinkets. So let's get into it. First, we're going to cover the changes that came with 8.2. Soothe, Moonfire, and Rebirth can no longer be casted inside cat form or bear form, and a couple of the flat healing proc and trinkets also got changed. They got a pretty big buff. Those trinkets are kind of like Mirror of Entwined Fate, Ward of Envelopment. Those two got pretty big buffs. My thoughts on the change to Moonfire not being able to be cast, whatever. Soothe, I use a lot when I'm in cat form, when I'm cat weaving, and it's gonna suck that I'm gonna have to jump out of cat form to use it, but we didn't get any numbers nerfs, nothing got changed other than that, so I'm not really all that upset about it. Onto the talents. We have two main builds that run with Resto Druid. Because we didn't get any changes, there isn't really much of a change to the builds for Resto Druid. The two top builds are still Photosynthesis and Germination. First off, I'm going to cover the Photosynthesis build. That's my favorite. Your first talent choice that you're going to go with is going to be Cenarian Ward. You can use Abundance with this, but because you're not using Germination, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to use Abundance, which increases Regrowth's effectiveness when there's more rejuvenations. But since you're not using Germination, you're not going to have as many. And on top of that, when you're not using Germination, Cenarian Ward outperforms Abundance by a pretty good margin. As for your second talent choice, you're probably going to want to go with Wild Charge. Tiger Dash is fully viable, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it does really kind of come down to a personal choice. For me, though, I do prefer using Wild Charge because of the multiple applications of its abilities. So you can leap forward in travel form. If you're a cat weaving player like I am, you can leap to the enemy behind them to avoid mechanics or to get closer, or you can leap to a friendly. It just really helps out in a lot of different ways, and that's kind of why I prefer that talent. As for the 45 tier, Feral Affinity is going to be your main go-to talent choice for that spot, especially if you're going with Photosynthesis. Because with the Photosynthesis build, it's meant to lower the amount of GCDs that you use, or global cooldowns, which allow you to have more time to help DPS and get bosses down faster, which ultimately makes the dungeon go quicker. You can use Guardian Affinity if you're a newer player to Resto Druid or you're not confident. There's nothing wrong with using Guardian Affinity, you just won't be doing as much damage, but the 6% damage taken and the ability to use Frenzied Regeneration does help a lot with that. For your 60 choice, it is based on personal preference and your team comp. There are some applications, like for example in King's Rest, the adds that fear you that are right before the first boss, and they spawn at Zool as well. You can mass root them until you have a Blood Elf ready or an ability that can get rid of them. Also on the first boss of King's Rest, the little gold adds that spawn during that fight, you can mass root them so that you don't have to kill them when they spawn. Other than that, Typhoon is probably better in most cases, but if you're lacking stuns, you can go with Mighty Bash. It's just kind of based on what your team comp kind of needs. For your next talent choice in tier 75, you're gonna want to go with Cultivation, and that ties in with the less GCDs used for this build. If you used Incarnation, you'd have to be, not in cat form throwing heals, and sometimes you don't need it. With this build, you don't really need huge burst healing all the time. And the times that you do need it, you don't need it for very long, and so you end up wasting a large cooldown for not a lot of reasons. With Cultivation, it automatically applies as long as there's a rejuve on the target, so you get 2 hots for the price of 1 GCD. It's very helpful, and it outperforms Incarn using this build. For the next tier, for level 90, same idea. Spring Blossom, it adds an extra hot to your target that it heals when it's in your Efflorescence. And you're going to be using Efflorescence a lot, especially if you're using a mostly melee comp or mostly ranged comp. Either way, but you're going to want people to stand in your Mushroom because it adds so much healing for the amount of mana you use for it. And the added hot definitely helps, and it stacks with your mastery, so it's all around a really good thing, and it makes it for 1 less GCD for you. And then finally, you're going to go with Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is great, and it's easily, this is my favorite build, easily by far. I love it so much more than the other one. Photosynthesis, essentially, when your life bloom is on yourself, you will periodically heal for 20% faster on any of your HOTS. So if you have HOTS spread across all the whole 5 members of the team, they tick 20% faster, which is essentially about, 20% more healing, give or take. And then if your life bloom is on an ally, say the tank, there is a 5% chance that it will proc the bloom per hot on that target. So if the tank is taking heavy damage, for example, likely you're going to have 4 to 6 hots on the target, which can be anywhere between a 20 to 30% chance per tick to proc the bloom, which is a pretty big heal. And so it increases your single target by a lot. It increases your AoE healing by a lot depending on what you put it on, and you don't have to do anything severe to change that middle fight. That's really why I love this this talent build so much. Your other talent spec is going to be called the Germination spec, and it uses the Germination talent at the end of the tier. Your first talent that you're going to go with is probably going to be Abundance. Because when you use Germination, Abundance is going to outperform Cenarian Word slightly, which makes Abundance the better talent choice. For your level 30 tier, it's kind of the same with Photosynthesis. It's more of a personal preference. I recommend using Wild Charge, but it's up to you. As far as level 45 talent, you're not going to be able to find a whole lot of time to be in Feral Affinity, to be in cat form, doing DPS, using Germination, because you're using so many more GCDs to get your healing out, having to double rejuve everything. You can use Feral Affinity to use cat form, but you can also use Guardian. It's not really a huge deal because you're not going to be doing that much more damage. Same with the level 60 tier in Photosynthesis. It's going to be based on your comp, your personal preference, or the dungeon, whatever. In the level 75 tier, you can pick between Cultivation or Incarn. Cultivation will perform really well, just as well as Incarn will, and Incarn is for more this build focuses on single target healing, and so sometimes you're going to want that extra big heal for long fights on like tyrannical bosses and stuff that are really high keys that you can't really find the ability to heal with the other build. It's possible, but it's easier to do with the Germination build. So you can choose between Cultivation and Incarn. If you're having trouble healing the tank or single target healing, go with Incarn. Then you should go with Stonebark for your level 90 tier. Spring Blossoms doesn't really perform quite as well with this build because you're dropping all kinds of different extra hots and stuff via Cultivation and Cenarian Ward, etc., etc. Spring Blossom still is viable a little bit, but you're kind of, if you're doing the Germination build, you're probably trying to focus on single target healing, and Stonebark will help a lot with that. And then finally, of course, you're going to go with Germination. Germination just allows you to apply Rejuvenation twice to the same target, and you can just blanket the team with rejuves. The Photosynthesis build is more, like I said, for focusing on getting fewer GCDs so that you get more damage out. The Germination build is a more single target damage focus, and you're going to be spending a lot of your healing using Rejuvenation and Regrowth. Onto utility, obviously, Resto Druid has some of the best Mythic Plus utility in the game. I personally love Resto Druid. I've been playing it forever, obviously. It's my favorite, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The healing, obviously, it's a fun class to play, and their utility is incredible. Resto Druid hasn't really changed in utility since 8.15, and so, you can use Soothe to drop down raging packs during Raging Weeks on Mythic Plus or any other kind of Berserk that happens, which reduces the amount of damage taken by your tank significantly or other targets. Your Ursul's Vortex can be used to slow and grip mobs, allowing your tank to kite during heavy damage, or with high necrotic stacks. You can use Typhoon for the same reason, because it knocks them back and slows them, or it's really good on Sanguine weeks, where you can push them out of the Sanguine as soon as they die, so that the mobs that haven't died yet don't heal. Entangling Roots can be used to keep mobs in place, to negate mechanics, etc. In Freehold, the ad that spawns and comes and tries to blow somebody up, if you root it, he will start casting and just blow up wherever you root him at. Won't do any damage to anybody. As for Azerite traits, especially in Mythic Plus, I would specify, I would recommend using at least one Grove Tending trait. Grove Tending will add a heal over time effect to your Swiftmend. Whenever you Swiftmend a target, it will add a 9-second hot, which stacks with your mastery, which is one of the big reasons why you use it, and it does a pretty decent amount of healing. I wouldn't recommend getting any more than one for that trait, because the second and third trait of that trait are not as effective, nearly as effective, as the first one. For your other traits, I would aim to get like Trade Winds, Endless Hunger, Incite the Pack, like pretty good secondary proc chance traits, and then your final two spots are a bit more flexible, and I would say find something for DPS, like the Power of the Moon trait, High Noon, or Bonded Souls. All three of those, they are increase your damage a bit, which really help, because once you start getting higher keys, you're going to be needing to do damage, and so I would definitely recommend getting a High Noon or something like that. As far as your essences, essences came in 8.2, and they're brand new. For anybody who doesn't know, I would recommend striving to find Lifebinder's Invocation, which is gained from doing a +4 or higher in Season Mythic Plus, Season 3, the Memory of Lucid Dream is really good when you get it to a higher rank. It's gained from getting a level 3 bodyguard in Nazjatar, and the Vitality Conduit is gained from gathering the Aqueous Reliquaries from Queen Azara, the Queen's Court, and the Radiance of Azara bosses in the Eternal Palace raid. Another contender is the Well of Existence, which is gained from being honored with the Rustbolt Resistance. Since two of those 4 are not available right this minute, I would say probably the Well of Existence is probably my favorite one. All of them are good though, so you can either use the Memory of Lucid Dreams or the Well of Existence for now until the raid gets out and you get the new one, but I do really personally like the Well of Existence. It works a lot like the Mushroom did back in Mist of Pandaria. As for your stat priority, for dungeon content, you'll be looking at Mastery and Haste for most of your items. A lot of times your Mastery is going to be a lot more valuable than your Haste if you're using the Photosynthesis build, for example, because your Mastery increases your healing based on how many hots are on the target, and you're going to have quite a lot of hots on your target, be it with Spring Blossom's Cultivation if you need Cenarian Ward, you'll use that, Rejuvenation, Life Plume if you need it, even Swiftmend will add a hot to the target, so you're going to have hots everywhere, and even your Wild Growth, so Mastery is a very valuable stat in low man content like dungeons, because you're having fewer people, which means you can spread your hots out more. Haste is also very valuable, obviously, because it increases the ability to do everything. You do everything faster. Your energy regens faster while you're in cat form, so you can do more damage faster. Your auto attacks are faster. GCD reduces, so haste is a very important stat as well. And then critical strike is a little bit, versatility is a little under that, and then crit. And finally, Intellect. Intellect falls as your lowest stat, but since it's on everything, it doesn't really matter. Like, you're not going to get an agility piece just because it has more mastery. That doesn't really make sense. So, Intellect falls as your lowest stat, but, doesn't matter. As far as gems and enchants, I would say just socket your highest weighted item. So, obviously, like, Mastery I personally use only mastery, enchants, and gems because I like my mastery really high, helping the stack of the hots. But you can do either mastery or haste. It doesn't really matter too much. Macros and add-ons. Obviously, add-ons are your preference. There are some I would recommend for healing specifically, I guess, like proper raid frames are good. You don't need them. Obviously, you can have the blizzard frames, maybe a couple utility add-ons for like cooldowns and stuff are a good idea. You don't need them though, obviously. Let's see, grid and voodoo are good choices if you want. Voodoo is good for it's like Healbot kind of, but it's a little bit different. And then Grid is just a raid frame add-on. I use LVY for my entire interface. I also have SCADA, but for my whole interface I use LVY, so my raid frames are a bit different than the Blizzard ones. I would recommend getting Weak Ores or Tell Me When. Those are very good. Like I said, an add-on that tracks cooldown timers can be a good idea. It's not required, but for me, I use Exorcist raid tools. There are better ones out there, but Exorcist works fine with LVY. And for your raid cooldowns, you can set what you want to see. So for me, you know, I don't play with other healers for dungeons, so I don't have any of that showing. But I have everything else showing as far as like stuns and defensives and kicks, everything like that. So that way I can see when people have cooldowns, like my tank. If I need to tell my tank to use something, or if I know they don't have it, then I'll make sure to use something instead. It helps a whole lot. And then of course get a deadly boss mods or a bigwigs, so that way you know mechanics and stuff. That'll help a lot. As far as macros, I would say there's a couple that I use, but you can use whatever ones you want, but I have a couple. I have a self-cast innervate macro, so that when I press innervate, it will cast on my I have a mouse over target macro, or you can use the self one that just automatically casts on yourself. Obviously, I use the mouse over macro just in case, that way I can use it on my balanced Druid as well. Whenever I do world content or battlegrounds, whatever, I can just mouse over whoever needs to innervate and use it on them. But you can also use the auto self-cast on yourself. I use a macro, Travel Cat is what I call it. It puts you in travel form if you are outdoors, or it puts you in cat form if you are indoors. So if you're in a dungeon that that trades between inside and outside, you don't have to use two different keybinds, you just use the same one. So I hit travel form while I'm outside, I go into travel form. If I go indoors, it will automatically put me in cat form when I press that. It's very helpful. And another one, I use mouse over root, so if I want to root a target, all I have to do is mouse over it and press the button, don't have to change targets. So if I need to heal somebody right after I get done with the root, so I click on this guy, he's my friend, I need to root this target, and then I can heal him right afterwards. You can also use mouse over heal macros. Those are fine too. I don't use them myself just because I haven't used them for, you know, as long as I've played already, so I don't really feel the need to change it. But you can, it does help a little bit. As far as best in slot gear and trinkets go, I would say for your Azerite traits, obviously I mentioned them earlier, kind of keep an eye out for your Azerite traits. Gear, keep an eye on your stat weights. It's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world if you have crit verse on your gear. Mastery is always preferred, but it's not the end of the world. Resto Druid is pretty lucky. Our stats are not super far apart as far as value. And trinkets are a big one. Your trinkets right now, the best one by far is called Azara's Font of Power, which comes from Queen Azara in the Eternal Palace. Not everybody obviously is going to have access to that trinket, and it's also super overpowered right now, and will probably be nerfed within the first 2 weeks of the raid being released. However, the other contenders will be Ignition Mage's Fuse from Toll to Gore. I think it's the third boss, I believe. But if you're doing Mythic Plus, it just comes out of the cache. You can get the Mirror of Entwined Fate from King Rosticon. It's very strong still, even when you compare it to trinkets from the next raid. The Ward of Envelopment from the first boss of Drazhar Lore. And then other contenders are the Ingenious Mana Battery from Operation Mechagon, and the Zoetroid egg sac from Orgoza in the Eternal Palace. Those two aren't quite yet available, but they will be soon, and they are pretty good. If you want them instead of the old raid stuff, go for it. But that's it. That wraps up my guide for 8.2. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below, or you can join my Discord. I'll have it in the description below. I am pretty much always available for answering questions on my Discord. I have it on my phone, so if you want to ask questions, pop into my Discord. I have a Resto Druid discussion thread that I opened up on it, so if you want to talk, ask questions, other people can answer if they know. If you don't know, I'll come to it eventually, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.